Welcome to the Brigham Young University Family History Library webinar series. Feel free to use the chat box for any questions or comments during the presentation. If we are unable to answer them during the presentation, we will answer them at the end. My name is Braden Knudsen. I will be your host for this webinar. Today we will be pleased to hear from James Tanner, who will be giving a presentation titled Searching Beyond Google with Search Engines and Portals. James Tanner has a bachelor's degree in Spanish and a master's degree in linguistics from the University of Utah. He received a Juris Doctor degree in law at Arizona State University. He served for 2 years as an intelligence analyst for the U.S. Army and 39 years as an Arizona trial attorney. He has previously owned a retail computer business and an Apple Macintosh software company. James has over 32 years experience in genealogical research and is an avid blogger of Genealogists blog and Rejoice and Be Exceeding Glad. He served for 10 years as a missionary at the Mesa, Arizona Family Search Library and is currently serving at the BYU Family History Library. He has presented at expos and conferences around the U.S. and Canada. James has 7 children and 33 grandchildren.
Howdy, this is James Tanner, and we're here for another webinar with from the BYU, or Brigham Young University Family History Library on the campus in Provo, Utah. We'd like to remind everyone that these webinars are being recorded and uploaded to the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel at youtube.com. If you do a search for BYU Family History Library, you'll find our channel, and we have now over 150 videos, both short ones and long ones, and also the ones that are upcoming will be uploaded. We're going to talk today about searching beyond Google with search engines and portals, and we'll have to explain all that, of course, as to what all those things are. First of all, kind of noting here that searching or finding your genealogy online is an art and a science. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, it is not just simply a set of procedures that you go through. If I gave you a long checklist of you do this, and you do this, and you are through and you have found everything there is to find online, I would be wrong. Because what it in fact is a lot of experience, intuition, and a little bit of inspiration as to how you can find certain things online. I can do the same search over 4 or 5 times and come up with 4 or 5 different responses every single time I do it. And one thing that I've noticed recently is that, especially in working with a family tree program, like FamilySearch.org's family tree, I can add information to an entry and do another search. I can substitute some information and do another search. And each time I do that, I will get different results. And by using the results to add additional information for searching, I still find more things. So it's sort of an endless process, and sometimes it gets to be quite interesting to see how much information you can kind of ferret out of what's going on out there on this vast thing we call the internet with millions and millions and millions of computers. So the first thing we have to know is that there's always more information that can be squeezed out of online resources. There's no real finite amount of information out there. When people tell me that they've looked everywhere, I realize that that's not only a vast overstatement, but it would be virtually impossible. There is no way that you can search everywhere. There's always more information to be squeezed out of different things. Most of the time, we get into some difficulties where it's just simply is simply difficult. It's simply difficult to even conceptualize how you would go about searching for the information. And sometimes, as we'll find here, you're really searching for further places to look for more information, because not everything, surprisingly, I mean, maybe you've thought this in your life, but surprisingly, there's not everything in the world hooked up to Google. Google is not the end of the universe as far as finding all the information that there is out there. And I'll explain why that is in just a second here. But first of all, we have to understand that when people do research, it's very seldom systematic. And I'm not really one to talk about doing systematic research, because my style is more intuitive, follow my instincts, and just keep typing and making searches until I find what I'm looking for. But a lot of people use a scattergun approach. And this is a quote from the Harvard University Library Research Guide for History, and it says, most of the search engines do not allow limitation to digitize manuscripts, archival material, and so forth. Manuscripts and archival material is often swamped by printed matter and open access scientific publications using appropriate search keywords, e.e. papers, correspondence. Encoded archival description, or EAD, is useful, and image limitation is more frequent. Okay, so here's what this is saying. I'm going to translate that now into English. What it's saying is when you do searches, the search engines that you use do not let you specifically search for manuscript/archival material. And so what you get when you do the search are standard printed or open access scientific publications. Now this goes for all types of material. So when I am searching online, I'm going to talk about some of the sources, resources that I found by going into a deeper search than just the what you would find in a superficial Google search. Additionally, what happens and what it's saying here is that when you do a search on Google and you get, let's say you search for your grandfather, great-grandfather, whatever, in a certain town, and or a certain place, and you get a lot of results, you get hundreds of thousands of Google hits. What you don't know is that what you're looking for may be on page 200 of all of those sources that are listed. The reason for that is quite simple. It's that Google organizes the responses to its search. It creates a hierarchy based on the number of times that a source is actually used. So what you're finding are the most used sources, not the ones you're particularly interested in. So if a website has more hits than another website, or this particular document's been searched for more than another document, then you're going to get more hits. You're going to get a higher ranking on Google than you get if it is something really obscure, but something that you are the one that's interested in, and you're never going to really see that come up in a Google search unless you can happen to guess the exact wording of that document, and that exact wording is online, and then you might actually find it. But that is, it's very difficult. For example, there's a book about my great-grandfather. It's called Henry Martin Tanner, Arizona Pioneer, and it goes on. The title is quite long. If I do just a standard Google search for Henry Martin Tanner, my ancestor, that book never comes up. I hardly ever find it. Way is because it's way out of print. It's only got a few printed copies. It's limited to a few libraries, and it is simply not available. And if I look online and ask Google if that book has been digitized, for example, there's an ebook copy, it says there's no ebook available. Well, there is an ebook available. It happens to be on FamilySearch.org in their book collection. And the whole book is there, and it's downloadable, and you can use it all you want and search it and do whatever you want with the book. So Google has no idea that it's there. And so all the searching that you do for Google is not going to help you find that book in the ultimate end. Now, there are some tools beyond that, and that's why we're talking about this today, that will take you right to that book, and it'll put that up at the top of the list. So this is really what this is saying. Now, the encoded archival description is or the EAD is a standard way of cataloging archival material. Unless you happen to know what that means, and unless you happen to know how to use it, it's probably not going to do you a lot of good. But it's nice to know that there are such things out there, that moving on into more technical areas of doing historical searches, translated into genealogical searches, basically can become more productive if we know more about how to do these searches. Okay. And I would point out also that discouragement comes from looking for exact information. Here's the most common scenario that I find, is that someone comes into the library and they ask for me, and I go talk to them, and they say, I've been looking for years and years for my great-great-great-grandfather's death date or marriage date or birth date or whatever. And we've just completely stopped. And I just keep searching over and over and over, and we never find the documents, anything that shows when he died or how he died or where he died. Well, okay, yeah. The problem is, even if that particular piece of information is recorded, that finding the documents that have that information is the real problem. It's not that the date is the problem, it's that you haven't found a source or a way of searching that source that tells you that information. There's always the possibility, of course, that nobody ever recorded it and that it's not there, and you could search forever and never find it. So basically what happens in those situations is there's sort of a limit of how many times you go searching or how much you search for it. And once you've kind of reached your internal limit, and I can't say any other way that it just comes from experience, in my case, I just turn it off. In other words, all of a sudden I go, I'm through with that one, and I go on to something else. But what happens is that I will come back to it. And in one case, simple example, I was looking for the birthplace of my great-great-grandfather. Not recorded properly when he was alive, obviously not correct after he died, never could locate it, and regardless of that situation, over a 15-year period, I looked in a lot of different places, everything from physical sources like the city archives of the city of Philadelphia to his church records at the Fourth Presbyterian Church in Philadelphia, to almost any place I could think of that it might contain the information concerning where he came from, and never found it. After 15 years of looking, I finally found it. I found it in the family history library in records that had been recorded during his lifetime, where he had come in and provided the information, giving the person who recorded the information his birthplace. And that took me 15 years to identify that record. But I didn't become obsessed with it. I went on and did other things. And it just so happened that when I was in the library in Salt Lake, it occurred to me that I hadn't looked in those particular records. And when I did, I found what I needed to do. So this is kind of the way that it occurs when you're looking for information online, is that you have to have a limit of how many times you're going to search. And then you have to go on and come back to it when you have a different perspective, or when there's more records available, or when you understand there are more places to look. So, important thing here to repeat is that Google does not search everything. So what doesn't it search? It does not search the items in most library catalogs. And I can do that, say the same thing about archives and other historical societies and things like that. Most of those people have enough sense to, when they're running their library, or they're not let just anybody come in and search their catalog. There's enough problems with online people doing find with viruses and Trojan horses and all sorts of things, that most of these institutional types and so Google's automatic searching does not come into those areas. So that's an important thing to know, because now you're going to have to shift gears a little bit and go from searching for your name of your ancestor to searching for libraries or other archives that may have the name of your ancestor, and then using their catalog. And I mention this now, and this will reinforce it, that many of the archives are also in the same position as libraries, as I mentioned. And then also, it does not search records that are not digitized or online. Okay, that sounds pretty simple. If it's sitting in a courthouse in Kentucky or someplace in the South, Mississippi or someplace, it probably is not going to be found by Google. Now, you might find the courthouse, and you might find that they have a series of records, but it's not necessarily going to search the individual records that haven't been digitized or put online. And something else that's important is, for example, just an offhand example, and this is used as a reason for doing indexing, and that is that when Family Search has taken its vast microfilm collection and digitized it, that's basically substituting one uh, type of document for another type of document. In other words, it doesn't make it any easier. Well, it makes it easier physically to find your people on a digitized copy of a microfilm than it does in the original microfilm, simply because of the way that digital copies work. But it doesn't help you find the name or read the entries or do anything else any easier than it would be if you were looking at the original microfilm record. And so Google's not going to find those unindexed, the records that are out there that you can find the record, but you're not going to find your ancestor's name on the record. Now, to understand that, you need to understand the difference between a static and a dynamic website. A static website is written in plain HTML, which is the language, hypertext markup language, that is used to create the websites on the internet. And what you see is what you get. In other words, unless it's written on a website in some static language where it's not changing, that's what Google finds. That's where it goes. If it's not that, then it's not going to find it. And all of these different pages, millions and billions of these pages, are discoverable by Google, but someone may not have put your ancestors' information into one of these pages. And it may still be out there in a document or manuscript or some other place that has yet to be entered into the internet. Now, dynamic websites use what's called a scripting language. In other words, they're programmed so that when you make a inquiry or a query, as they say, into the database, then that query is returned to you from the information in the database, but then is returned to the database when you close the query window. So if I'm searching for a book in a catalog in a large university library, like BYU library, then when the search engine that I'm using, the program that does the actual searching of the catalog, will produce the book. So I put in the name of a book I'm interested in, I find out that it's in the library, it brings that up, it tells me it's in the library, it tells me where I can find it in the library, it tells me if I can check it out, or if it's in reserve, or if it's a reference volume that can't be circulated. And then when I click that away, it goes away. Google does not find that entry. That entry appears only during the time that I'm actually doing the search on that website. So I can't come back with Google and look for the same book and expect to find out where it is in the library or anything like that. Unless, for example, I happen to make a copy of the page in some kind of format, and then I publish that page online. Now, so randomly you might find entries in a catalog, like the university catalogs. But when you start looking at it from the standpoint of how the programs work and how the search engines work, you realize that you can't use Google to get into these catalogs. You have to go to University of Utah, BYU, Brigham Young University, University of Arizona, any of the schools. Go down the list of the 1,000 or so colleges and universities there are in the United States, and in order to see what they have, you would have to search each one of those individually, unless they agree otherwise. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. We'll see. Okay, so for genealogists, what does this mean? This means that static websites are searchable and discoverable. That's the bottom line here. It means that dynamic websites have to be individually discovered and then searched. So beyond searching online for your ancestor's name and any of the family names or anything like that, or county histories or whatever else you're looking for, you have to realize that there's still all these other websites out there, a huge number of websites that have to be individually discovered and searched before you can find the information. Now, over the last few years, I've talked a lot about, say, for example, newspaper websites. I've talked about digital book websites. I've talked about sites with maps. I've talked about all these different kinds of websites. And the purpose of looking at all these different kinds of websites is simply because they are dynamic websites. They're not being searched by Google. And unless you become aware of the fact that there is a database of, oh, I'm just going to pull something out of the air here, a database in Serbia, for example, and that it has a list of all of their resources on it, you probably are never going to find that information because you haven't looked for the website instead of looking for the information that you're searching for. Okay, so this is kind of what we're talking about here today, and that is that we have a whole universe, if you will, of information that is not really part of the internet, and yet it's discoverable and viewable through the internet under certain conditions when you identify those particular websites. They're called portals, and there are other things that we refer to them as. So this is the key thing. Most of the records are on dynamic websites. So regardless of how much you think you've searched, unless you start searching in these libraries and these archives and these other things, you really haven't looked at any small amount of the records. Now, the classic example of this, if there's a classic example in the United States of America, is the National Archives. The National Archives has billions of records. They measure their records in cubic feet. They don't even count how many records they have. They just tell you how many cubic feet of records there are. But the number of those records that are actually digitized and searchable is almost a decimal point with so many zeros that you can't even write it out in a practical period of time. There's only a few, very, very small number, percentage-wise, of all the documents that they have. Now, not all of the documents they have, obviously, are even interesting to genealogists. I mean, we don't even care about a lot of the stuff like, soil measurements in Montana and stuff like that. But basically what we have is a vast amount of information that's only searchable if you go into their catalog. And if you go into their catalog, it will only tell you the record group number and the area that the record may be in. So then somebody's going to have to physically go in there and look through virtually page by page in many cases and see what's there. So this is the kind of the reality of what we're dealing with here. So if you're using a general search engine, and I mean a general search engine like Google or like Bing or like Yahoo or like any of the others out there, Dogpile, whatever you want to use, you're missing a lot of content. And in essence, you're seeing that little green puzzle piece there in the middle, and you're missing all the rest of the puzzle pieces. You've really kind of skipping over the surface of what's happening with information and not understanding that you can find a lot more. So if I were to try to tell you and give you an exhaustive list of all the specialized search engines and portals, it would be impossible. In fact, they're changing so much every day that there's probably no chance in the world I'm ever going to catch up with it. So the issue here is you need a sort of an idea that they're there, and then you need to use a little bit of intuition, common sense, or whatever else that I mentioned earlier to try to find out where the possible information would be. And we're going to talk about a couple of case studies here on doing it. Now let's move to the first major outside of Google place to go for information in the world, and that is the worldcat.org catalog. This is the OCLC WorldCat. Started back in 1968 as a consortium agreement between certain libraries, and has now expanded to cover thousands and thousands of libraries worldwide with over 2 billion, that's with a B, billion catalog entries. And what does this do? This searches libraries. If you want to, for example, search the BYU library at Brigham Young University, Harold Bealey Library here on campus, you go to WorldCat. It will search the catalog. If you want to search the Family History Library in Salt Lake City, you go to WorldCat. If you want to search any of these big libraries out there, you go to WorldCat. Um, Basically, what that does is it will tell you when you're looking for an item. Now, this is a catalog search. This is not a string search. So what you're looking for has to appear either in the information that has been cataloged about the material or in the title of the material. So if I'm looking for Henry Martin Tanner, Arizona Pioneer, the title has to say that, or someone who cataloged that for a library had to put some of those keywords in there for me to find that information. So I'm not going to find it in WorldCat unless I know how to use a library catalog. And in the past, I've talked about this a number of times about how do you learn to use a library catalog. You learn to use a library catalog the same way you learn to ride a bike, go swimming, learn to fly an airplane, learn to dance, read a book, whatever it is you have, it's a specialized skill. It is something that you have to actually practice and do and learn. Now, can you learn how to do it better? Yes, you can go to classes on searching libraries. You can go to libraries and talk to people and ask for help, but ultimately, it comes from experience, and it comes from doing searches in the library over and over and over again until you understand what's happening. In this case, for example, one of the things that I learned when I began working at the University of Utah Library as a bibliographer when I came back from mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And got married, so I needed a job, so I went to work in the library. Of course, I couldn't think of any other place I'd rather work. So I was there for all the years of the rest of my undergraduate work and my graduate work at the University of Utah. One of the things that I learned, and my job was basically to do catalog searches every day, every time I went to work. So all I did was sit there with the card catalog going through, looking up things. And if people were paying me to go look at the catalog, I figured, wow, this is a nice job. After a few years, let me tell you, we learned how to use catalogs, and we learned how to use all the reference materials, and we learned how to find books. But I found one other thing that was very important. I discovered, well, here's my activity. Of course, I'm stuck in the library, and that's not a lot of physical exercise sitting there looking at card catalogs. So I decided on my breaks that I would start at the top of the library and look at every shelf in the entire catalog, in the entire library. So I started walking every shelf, miles of shelves, as I worked my way down through this huge library. One thing that I discovered was that all of a sudden I realized that the catalogers were not consistent. We would find the same exact material cataloged and put in two separate locations in the library. And then I find it in 2 or 3 different locations. And then I began to realize that looking for material in a library and guessing what the catalogers had to say about it was more of an art in some cases than it was a science. And so that's where the art part came in, because what I decided was that, yeah, even if I do find it. So here's what I do now. I will get like I did just recently, I was looking for an ancestor who was born, I believed, in Vermont, one of the states, Vermont. And so I looked up a book in the card catalog, in the online BYU Harold B. Lee Library catalog, and I found a book on Vermont history. So then I went to the social sciences section where that book was located, and I located that section of books in the library. So then I determined where the beginning book of that section was and where the ending book was of all the books in the library here at BYU on Vermont. And I started pulling them off the shelf one by one and looking through them and the indexes to see if my ancestor was in the book. As I pulled the books off the shelf one by one, eventually I found a probate record for my ancestor that I was looking for, a transcribed probate record, which I had absolutely no idea was there. But it was the way. Now, I have to use that same technique with an online search on an online catalog. Even though I physically don't mean it, it means I start looking at general categories and start looking through material until I find something that looks like it just might have some information that I'm looking for. And then that gives me a further way to be more focused in my searches. And ultimately, of course, with catalogs, you're going to end up either trying to find the same item that has been digitized online, or you're going to have to find the paper copy sitting in some library someplace. That's why we have what's called interlibrary loan, which is a system where you can request from your local library and try and get copies of all these kind of more obscure things that are in other libraries around the world. Okay, so here we have WorldCat with over 2 billion catalog entries from tens of thousands of libraries, and this is one of the first kind of windows out to this vast amount of information that's sitting there on the internet that you aren't going to find in Google. Are all these book titles going to be in Google? It's possible, but WorldCat is going to tell you where it is and where to look for it. And as a matter of fact, if you do a Google search for a book, over on the side there is a link that says "Find in a Library," and it will take you to WorldCat. So this is really kind of Google admitting that the stuff that's in WorldCat is not in what they're doing. And so if I looked in the WorldCat catalog, for example, I find that there's 1.3 million entries on a search for genealogy. So there's a lot of information out there on genealogy in these various libraries and catalogs. And one other thing that WorldCat does for you is that when you find something like this book that I've used as an example, The Source, a guidebook of American genealogy, then there's a little link up there that says cite export, and basically if you click on that, it gives you a pre-formatted citation for that piece of material in the APA, MLA, Chicago Manual of Style, or Harvard Style Manual. So that's in addition, it gives you a list of the libraries that have the material and the distance you'd have to drive to get to the library. So you put in your zip code and then it tells you how far away these libraries are. So it's telling me that Brigham Young University Library is a mile away, which is exactly correct from where my house is. So, okay, so this is a way to find items that may not appear in a general search. So in order to complete a search online, you would need to go to these particular types of websites like WorldCat that contain additional information to items that are not found by a general Google search. Here you can search for places, surnames, library collections, manuscripts, all sorts of things here. So there's lots of different items that can be searched for that may be the items that are available because they've been cataloged. Now, like I said earlier, this is a skill that's acquired, and the ability to focus in on a specific topic in a catalog is something you just have to try over and over again until it's something you can do and work on. But once you get the idea that this is something you're trying to achieve, then you can do it. Now, the second part of this is called archivegrid.org. And ArchiveGrid is also a part of the OCLC, or the Online Computer Library Consortium. And it's basically a group, the same organization that does WorldCat. But in this case, the ArchiveGrid includes 4 million records describing archival materials, bringing together information about historical documents, personal papers, family histories, and more, with 1,000 different archival institutions represented. So it gives you a primary source material. It looks for primary source material held in archives, libraries, museums, and historical societies. Does that sound interesting? Is that something you might want to look at if you were a genealogist and looking for information and couldn't find it? Well, here you go. Here's a major source that does a search specifically in these materials. most of which, by the way, would end up on page 300 of a Google search because they're never really searched. Okay, so I looked on ArchiveGrib for Tanner genealogy, and Tanner genealogy brought up 240 collections of papers in various special collections libraries across the United States. Now, the special collections library of a major library like university library, like here at Brigham Young University, is, my analogy here is that they are black holes. I may come to this again and reinforce that, but anything that happens within their particular academically established event horizon gets sucked into these special collections libraries. And they are, if they're interested in the history of your happen to be your ancestors' county, then they probably have every document that they've been able to dredge out of the state about that county sitting in their library. And if it's not there in the original, it's there in a copy, and they've managed to get everything they can think of. And they have people who are hired by the libraries to do nothing more than sit there and add documents to their collection. So this is where this is. Now, let me give you kind of an idea here. If your ancestors happen to come from North Carolina, for example, there are like 100 universities and colleges in North Carolina. That's not an accurate number, but that's about how many there are. Each of those libraries has a special collections department. If your guys came from North Carolina, until you have looked at every one of those catalogs, you really haven't done a complete search for your ancestors. You don't know that somebody else's exhaustive papers didn't include your ancestors. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then this is another one from OCLC. It's called, you're not going to believe this, Oyster. OAISTER. And the Oyster database is a union catalog. Now, that's another kind of a specialized term. A union catalog means that it's a gathering of more than one catalog. It's a union of catalogs. It's a lot of different information from a lot of different areas. And it has millions of records representing open access resources. Okay, so an open access resource is an idea that we're not going to make this proprietary. We're going to allow everybody to come in and search, except Google. And we're only going to allow our guys to look at it. So unless you've got the magic, whatever it is, high sign or whatever you've got to give to get into these places, you're not usually going to get in there. Even a university library like the Brigham Young University Library, if you go to our special collections, you really have to fill out an application form to do research in the library. And you have to show some intent and purpose for doing what you're doing, because they just don't let anybody come in. So this has been harvested from open access collections worldwide, and they have what's called the Open Archives Initiative Protocol for Metadata Harvesting, which is OAIPMH. And it includes more than 30 million records representing digital resources from more than 1,500 contributing libraries and archives in the United States. A lot of stuff. When was the last time you looked at this? Okay, think about it. Okay, so let's kind of move on to some of the other things. Here's Oyster. Now, what did I find when I went on this? Okay, my usual thing is, so I look up to find something about Tanner genealogy. And I find this thing called the George S. Tanner Papers. And it's at the J. Willard Marriott Library at the University of Utah, Manuscripts Division. And it says date of the originals, and it's got a whole bunch of dates there. So what did this turn out to be? Well, this turned out to be in another portal out there called Archives West that once I knew that this existed, then I could go look for it. Well, actually, let me tell you, of course, I'm front-loading all this stuff so it works when I do the little demonstrations here online. Actually, I ran across this in a search, doing just exactly that, looking in catalog searches and things, and I ran across this question because George S. Tanner was my great uncle, And he wrote extensively about my grandfather, my great grandfather, and all of the other people in the area of northern Arizona, which was settled in the late 1800s. So I was trying to figure out whatever happened to all of George Tanner's papers. Where's all the research stuff? He was a professor at up at Brigham Young University in Idaho, or Idaho University, or whatever. But he was a professor and did a lot of research. And so I found a number for his son, and I called him up and I said, "Where are Uncle George's manuscripts and papers?" And he said, "I don't want to talk about it," and hung up. So there's obviously something going on there, and I'm going, well, this is really weird. There's got to be papers out there, you know. There's got to be some backup for all these books that he put out. And so I kept searching, and I ran across this in my searches. I would like to say that I found it in Oyster, or I found it on WorldCat, or whatever, but however I found it, I don't even remember how I did it, but I kept looking and found this. I had no idea where it is, but I found that it was also, there was a copy of this in the Klein Library at Northern Arizona University. And I happen to go through Flagstaff, where that's located in Northern Arizona, frequently, so I found a day that we didn't have anything else really going on, and I stopped off and went through the library. Okay, well, this is the situation here. This is 21.25 linear feet of manuscripts and documents. And that's all about the little tiny town called Joseph City, Arizona, where my great-grandfather lived, and a lot about northern Arizona. Everything you can imagine, and you get into the list of all of the materials in this collection, there are probably close to between 50 and 100 individual biographies, journals, and records in that one collection of that one town. How would you know that? How would you find that unless you were used to looking in these kinds of catalogs and just trying to discover this kind of information? So my wife and I we went into the library and we said, "You have the George S. Tanner papers?" And they looked, you know, the student employee who was sitting there at the counter went with on the computer and said, "No, we don't have that." I said, "Yes, you do. Look again." And so he went, there it was. Okay. He said, "Yeah, we have it." Only they only had 16 linear feet of it, because they have copies instead of the originals. So, and they said, "How do you want it, all at once, or do you want to bring it out a box at a time?" And I said, "Well, can we copy it?" And they said, "Can I bring my scanner in?" They said, "No, we don't allow scanners." I said, you can have a piece of paper and a pencil." I said, "I don't think so." I said, "What if I brought my camera in and took pictures of it?" They said, "Oh yeah, we don't care. You can come take all the pictures you want. It's not under copyright or anything." And so I said, "Fine." So we went in and I sat there. My wife sat there all afternoon. She turned pages and I took pictures. And we ended up with thousands of copies of documents that otherwise we would have no access to and have never seen before. Some of which are very, very specific about my family. Okay, so that's kind of one example of the kinds of things that if you dig into, that you will find more information than you had imagined. Now let's go to some other portals out there. A portal is a website that links you to other websites, and that's helpful, especially if the portal is focused on a particular type of website. So you, instead of having to search 15 different or 100 different websites, can search one portal, and that portal will then connect you to all of the information in all of those other websites. So that's where the advantage comes from. So here, this is the one that started up recently in the United States in the last couple of years. It's called the Digital Public Library of America, and the address is dp.la. No .com, not .org or anything else. It's just dp.la. You type that into your search bar, and bing, it'll bring up the Digital Public Library of America. And what's happened here is it has, and right now it looked like in this one it said 13,853,000. Well, in the time that it's taken me to process this this presentation for publication and put it up online and go through all that process. Basically, it's gone up over 1 million. So there's now over 14 million items there. Now, this is a very fast-growing item, and what they're dedicated to doing is providing free access to all sorts of things. Here's all the current list of participating organizations from around the United States and mostly around the United States, and the number currently of documents that are searchable here on the Digital Public Library of America. So if I want to search what's in the Hoth Trust or the National Archives and Records Administration, the few records that they actually do have it indexed and digitized, then those records will be available through the search here on the dpa.la. So the New York Public Library and other people now recently, within the last few months, the FamilySearch.org website, the Family Search, has agreed to allow the Digital Public Library of America to search their historic book collections, which means the 300+ thousand digitized books that are on the Family History Library, on the FamilySearch.org website. Digitized books are now being converted so that they will be searchable here through the Digital Public Library of America. So there's a lot of information, more overwhelming amount of information available just through this. Now, if you were to search through Google to try to find the individual pieces of information here, either they would be blocked or, like I've been saying, they would appear way down in the search list. So this is a more focused way. And the interesting thing about the Digital Public Library of America is that their search engine and their tools and their all of the little add-on utilities they have are just fabulously useful in trying to become focused in on the type of information that you're interested in looking for. Okay, so this is their comment. It brings together the riches of Americans' libraries, archives, and museums and makes them freely available to the world. So none of this is going to be charged, and you're going to be able to get into it and look for it. Now we're going to talk about the big libraries out there with the big collections. And I understand that the National Library of Australia's Trove is going through some political and funding issues right now, which is not unusual for libraries and archives, because they're usually number 15 on the list of the 10 things that the legislature would like to do and fund. So they're not usually viewed with as much value as we would seem to think they need. But Trove is by and far the largest online resource of digitized information in the world. Presently has over 506 million resources, books, images, historic newspapers, maps, music, archives, and more. And most people look at this and they say, well, I don't have ancestors in Australia. Why would I be looking for it? And my answer is, your ancestor, where'd they come from? Well, they came from England, Scotland, Wales, Western Europe. Okay, where did all your people go? Well, they didn't all come to America. Some of them went to Australia or New Zealand or wherever else. And you have probably got relatives in Australia. And so there may be records there in Australia. Now, of course, I bring this up because I have two of my family lines, my direct family lines, that came through Australia. But you never know. Here's the next one. This is a big portal called Europeana.eu. That's it. That's the title. I mean, that's the URL. Type that into your browser bar and it will come right to the Europeana. And the Europeana has about 55 million artworks, artifacts, books, videos, and sounds from a list of libraries that is almost endless in Europe. This has more information about European libraries than you could view in any other place that I'm aware in the world. So if you're looking for European information, I would start digging into Europeana. And you can search all sorts of different ways, and you can search in all catalogs from libraries from Spain and Portugal up to Norway and Finland and Sweden, and from across from Western Europe in England, Scotland, and Wales, all the way across the continent to Eastern Europe. So this is a big portal that searches millions and millions of records. And just some examples there. Now, we're going to look at some specialized portals here for just a couple of minutes. And this one is a maps portal. And this is oldmapsonline.org. There are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of digitized maps now online. Historical maps, current maps, satellite maps. And this is beyond the programs like Google Maps and the other mapping programs. Even beyond the maps that are in the bureau the USGS, the United States Geological Survey, where they have tens of thousands of digitized maps available now. But Old Maps Online gives you a convenient portal to search for all these maps. Now here's how it works. Basically, it indexes over 400,000 maps, and that's a lot, probably more than you want to search. Basically, what happens is you draw, there's a little tool up in the upper left-hand corner that lets you draw a rectangle on a portion of a map of the world. And when you do that, any map that they have that falls within that rectangle is then shown on the right-hand side list of the map searcher. So I can draw one around a small city, or a portion, and it'll show me every map that they can find that corresponds to that particular geographic point on the Earth. So everything that's in that rectangle is identified and on the right-hand side list, and you can scroll through that and look for years, old maps, new maps, everything that's out there. And then by clicking on the maps on the right-hand side, then you can go to that map. So here's a map that I clicked on. This is of, I think this is supposed to be London, but we'll see what it is. And we go in and look at it, and there is the detail of that particular map, and I can then zoom in even further. And this is the citation to the map. So this is an 1855 map of London, England. And when I zoom in on that map, I'm able to see as much detail as there is in the map itself. Okay, so now we're going to talk about a different type of portal that does a specialized search. This is like a specialized search engine. And this is the ACI Scholarly Blog Index. Now what that means is that they go through all of the blogs out there, literally. So they'll look at anything that's classified as a blog, and then they kind of organize it and make it so you can search for scholarly articles. So how do they know these people are scholarly? Actually, it's very simple. They look at the content, they look what the credentials are for the people, and it's basically professionals, people with advanced degrees, doctoral equivalent degrees, publishing in formal documents and publications. So if they can find you published in a journal, then they will believe your blog, in other words. So they then will give you a search for articles from those blogs that talk about whatever content you want. Now you could do a blog search on Google, because there's a program that you can go search blogs, but there you're running into the same problem. The problem is that you're looking at millions of blogs, and you're not looking at just scholarly blogs. You're looking at everything about cats and politics and sports and movies and whatever it is that people are writing about, and other unmentionable subjects. And so here we got somebody that says we're going to look for guys that only write about stuff that's credibly associated with some kind of academic achievement. Nice thing to know, nice place to look, And it basically goes through 10,000 different news and commentary blogs and more than 1 million scholarly blog posts, and they have that all indexed and searchable. So there's a way to get into that. Okay, so the answer here, as we look at it, is that there is no end to the resources online. And the things I've chosen here are merely be a sort of a, I guess, awakening. In other words, what I'm telling you is that the bridge here goes off into the clouds, but you can go down that bridge and keep going until you get to the other side. Now, the difference here is there is no other side. The bridge just keeps going forever. It's just sort of an infinite job where you just keep looking and you keep finding new things and having new experiences online. Now, I noticed there's a couple of questions about there being a syllabus, and the answer is all of these are completely recorded and up on the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel, and so we haven't, in most cases, haven't added any kind of a paper or additional explanation. You're free to write to us, email us, and let us and address any questions, and we'll be glad to come back and answer those questions as immediately as possible. So now we'd like to thank you for watching, and this is just another one of those endless paths off into the distance that you can take. By the way, these are the end photos on these webinars are usually my own photos, and this is one I just took recently from the top of Mount Timpanogos, right outside of Utah Valley. It's visible from the entire valley, very prominent mountain, and it's quite a hike. Thanks for watching, and tune in next time for more information.
Thank you very much, James, for the wonderful webinar. Be sure to go to our website to look up the information on upcoming webinars. This presentation and others can be found on the BYU Family History Library website, as well as our BYU Family History Library YouTube channel. We will see you next time.